Hi, I'm KEV Roberts, the host of Northern Soul Time. This episode is collecting Northern Soul. And I'm pleased to say we've got one of the world's foremost dealers and an all-round Northern Soul expert. I'm with Tim Brown. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Kev. Good to be here in this Charly Temple of Music.
Absolutely. So what's the state of collecting Northern Soul?
Well, obviously, it's never been more viable. Most people will have heard, or many people will have heard, that prices have gone astronomical, gone through the roof, gone into orbit. It's not the whole story, and we'll touch upon that later, but the fact remains, Northern Soul probably has become the world's most viable and valuable musical format in collecting terms.
Now, initially, it's been based on turntable play, but over the decades, there's a lot of spin-off genres, isn't there? It was just collecting Northern Soul. Now it's collecting modern soul, collecting crossover soul. There's a lot of different spin-offs. Can you explain all that to us?
Well, that's true. I mean, a lot of the various genres that have become collectible are non-UK based. Famously, the thing at the moment with the Californian crowd is sweet soul ballads. Which is slightly going off the subject, but the fact remains the Japanese were collecting these things 30 and 40 years ago. So there always has been some diversification in it. But to return to the subject of Northern Soul per se, it's always been a collectible thing. It's based upon one-upmanship. I've got something you haven't got. That's not only DJs. That's people that own the records as well. So it's always had a strong bedrock of collectability underneath it ever since the earliest days.
Are you quite surprised at some of the leaps? Because generally, when you're investing in anything, antiques or whatever, there's a price, then it goes up and it goes up. There's a trajectory. But don't you find that there's some records that maybe you were selling last year for £500 and they're £1,000 now, 1,500? Huge leaps.
There is an element of that at the moment, and even I'm not quite sure what it's all about. I'm tempted to think it's people reaching a certain age, which they've an amount of financial viability, money to burn, as it were, at a late stage in life. That might be a thing. The infiltration of the foreign market into the prices for Northern Soul. For instance, to get a lot of money from Japan now, it would probably be for a Northern Soul record, not for a Deep Soul record or a Sweet Soul record.
Which is what they used to be into.
And they weren't really interested that much in Northern, other than the completist thing. Now, if I sell an expensive Northern Soul record to Japan, it's likely to be exactly that, Northern. Yeah.
Right. Let's rewind, but also stay current on prices, with the world's rarest Northern Soul record, which you own and I used to. Tell us about it.
Yeah, you gave me a bit of a break there back in 1989. Yeah. It has to be said, when I bought that off you, and it has to also be said it was £5,000, that was easily the highest price that had ever been
It was.
paid.
It was.
Easily, by some way. So it's okay to rewind and look back with rose-tinted spectacles and somehow think, that wasn't very much money. It was a lot of money at the time. It was nothing to be dismissed very lightly. Of course, now we've got to a situation with that self-same record that we've got here is now worth at least £100,000. In fact, the other copy is being touted at more money than that.
Yeah. Is it the world's rarest Northern Soul record, technically?
Inasmuch as there are two, possibly not. You know, only two known and only two probably ever likely to be found. There's a test pressing. And
yes, there is, yeah.
That's an odd situation in itself. But possibly because the copies were all destroyed, it probably will never, ever be found again. There will be one or two other records that are known at the moment from only one copy. But two is pretty much as rare as it gets on a worldwide
And
basis.
the reputation's off the scale now, isn't it? If Frank was still alive, I think he'd be chuckling along with us. The fact that a lot of people don't like it. I see so many slurs against the record. I don't know if it's just overkill or we just speak about it too much, but certainly in my lifetime, it's been the scene's most popular record, for sure.
Yeah, I think it represents something else in a way, and it's almost escaped the confines of Northern Soul to become one of those records that, I mean, if it was limited to OVO, original vinyl only, then you'd never hear it.
No.
I don't DJ much. And
what I find interesting about it is today, if you play a DJ set and it's on the more commercial side, you could actually throw that in with the Supremes and the Isley Brothers, and people dance to it as if it was number one in the charts.
As if it was Stone Love or something.
Yeah,
like that.
absolutely. Yeah.
That is another element to the record, and it's obviously also being used on television adverts and all kind of things like that. And it's really bizarre in that the real, genuine original is so very rare, but the record has escaped the confines of rarity to become absolutely ubiquitous and one of the most commonplace Motown records in terms of a song that you might hear, and music that you might hear.
In terms of Northern Soul greatness, where do you rate it, Tim? If you were hearing it for the first time.
As a Northern Soul record, probably the best ever. As a personal favourite, I doubt personally it would make my top 100.
So you two have heard it too many times.
Yeah, it's not anything I'd ever choose to put on a turntable at home. That's a fact.
Frank Wilson's Do I Love You, the original copy, or one of the two original copies that are actual promos, is in the studio today with my guest Tim Brown. There's another great version by Chris Clark, which you've got a story behind, Tim.
Yeah, when we found the second copy of Frank Wilson with a gentleman in Detroit called Ron Murphy, who'd salvaged it from an engineer at the pressing plant who'd kept one when he was told to destroy the entire run. And we ended up buying all of Ron's collection, and he was unusual in so much as he was a contemporary of the Detroit music scene, a white guy, and he had actually bothered to accumulate Detroit records and Motown in particular. And amongst all the things we bought of him, not only was there the second copy of the Frank Wilson, he had an unissued test press by the Motown singer Chris Clark, for whom the record had always been intended by Frank Wilson. In fact, when I met Frank Wilson, he couldn't really explain why it ever came to be pressed up on Soul as a promo. He had no explanation for that. He didn't know anything about it.
Wow. Talking of valuable records, but a lot of copies in circulation, I think this is going to bring us into why turntable hits are so hot in the UK. We'll remove Frank Wilson for a moment and we'll bring into play this single, which is by Wade Fleming. I remember it actually in the early 70s knocking around cheaply and liked it, but didn't really play it or do much with it. Tell us more about it, Tim.
This is interesting because we've touched upon the fact that Northern Soul goes for an awful lot of money. Possibly in the round, there could be as many as 1,000 Northern Soul records that are worth £1,000 minimum. It's an awful lot of money. And most of these are genuinely rare. We'll see later a copy of a record that's really rare that doesn't go for anything like that kind of money. But another element to it is popularity. Without a shadow of a doubt, that brings into play money beyond the rarity of the record. And here we have a very good example. Chicago singer Wade Fleming, he made this in 66, wherever it was, 67, for Ramsey Lewis's label, Ramsel, concerning his affection for an ex-Emotion called Jeanette Hutchinson. Emotion's the female Stax Volt group. And a dealer of the time, who I'm sure you know well, John Anderson,
Yes.
he had started to bring, by the mid-70s, quantity of soul records in from America. Some were very few in number, others were large in number. And a good example was this. We don't really know how many copies of the Weird Fleming's Jeanette that John brought in, but the fact remains it was on his list for 75 pence. Since that time, and it's been a slow process, we've got to bear in mind we're talking now pushing 50 years, certainly 45, 40 years, the record became a very popular DJ spin and a huge dance floor favourite. The net result being that although Anderson imported at least 500 copies of it, the thing goes for 800 to £1,000. And this is driven purely by dance floor demand. And also, to a certain extent, the fact that every DJ worth his salt can get a copy.
Yeah.
It may be 800 quid, you know, that's a lot of meals out at Pizza Hut, but still, it's available if you want to own it.
Yeah, and it's pretty damn good as well. And
it's a great record.
It was very well. I don't think it got any room to manoeuvre in the early '70s when it was discovered, but truly a wonderful song.
That's an absolutely amazing record that actually now sounds like The Business, real gritty 60s soul. But I remember I purchased it off that John Anderson Soul Bowl list all those years ago in 1975, and John had two ways of describing a record, and no more. They were either recommended or highly recommended. Those were the only descriptions he ever used. And this was recommended. And I must admit, to my rather youthful ears at that time, I was ever so slightly disappointed with it when it came. It now sounds absolutely fantastic and has taken its place amongst the very best Northern Soul records, quite rightly. But the whole situation would have made the me of 1975 smile. I think round about that time you could buy a house for 800 quid, never mind a record.
Let's move on to Spinoff Genres, Tim, that do fall under the Northern Soul banner, but have just crept into the Northern Soul scene, as in people buying records that are not exactly filling the dance floor, but they are rapidly growing in stature and pricing. Well, what's your take on that?
There have always been collectors of this music, even when you go back to the 70s and things were far less compartmentalised than they are now, without a shadow of a doubt. But there were people at, for instance, the Blackpool Mecca, several that I knew, that more or less collected just what was known as the new wave of modern soul records and weren't so much concerned with what was happening at Wigan Casino. Blackpool Mecca's famous last hour spins, of course. They were a little bit of a world of their own, records that never really crossed beyond that last hour there.
The Celeste Hardys and Delilah Moores. And,
lots like that. And then a lot of collecting genres have been pulled along with Northern Soul collectability. So I've seen in my time of being a record dealer, funk move from the JBs and Bobby Bird, and you could sell plenty of those at one time, and the scene eventually matured into incredibly rare funk records that you scarcely ever seen or heard of before. The same thing happened with Deep Soul, the same things happened with Sweet Soul group ballads. That's almost like the natural evolution of the music. But the fact remains that Northern Soul set the yardstick.
Do you find it strange to find or have and own really rare records that were a particular price 50 years ago and they've not changed? They're still the same.
Yes, I'm not really here to undermine the music, but a lot of Northern Soul records, and some quite rare ones too, are actually not rising in price. They're falling in price. There are reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is the proliferation of copies on the internet.
Right.
So all of a sudden, if you want to buy, let's say, the impressions you've been cheating, there's probably 32 places you can go and get it. And those 32 places are all competing with each other because it's in one sales format on the internet.
It is popular, though. It is a song that's popular and will continue to sell. But I know what you mean. There's a lot of outlets now to find it. But
now you can find that very easily on an original label in decent condition.
Yeah.
And the price is probably falling, not rising.
Yeah. We went from Frank Wilson to something that could possibly be equally as rare. However, you alluded to it earlier, you don't think it's worth too much money?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because until very recently, I had never ever seen a copy of this on a stock copy, on a black issue, the one that would have gone to the shops. The internet says it doesn't exist. Plainly it does, because we've got it here. It's Mighty Joe Drake, Try, 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 which you remember from back in the day.
Of course,
got a few plays at the time.
Yeah, it did.
You didn't really ever hear it ever again. I never heard it played as an oldie alongside the Young Hearts or the Tempos or anything like that.
No, it doesn't.
There was a certain level of person remembered it fondly, recognised the inherent quality within the grooves, and continued to like it. So you could always kind of sell a white DJ copy. But it wouldn't surprise me if that wasn't the only one in Britain on a black stock.
Right.
Yet I would probably be fortunate to get much into the way of 3 figures for it.
Yeah.
Which just shows you it's demand driven.
Of course it is.
To a certain extent, it's dance floor driven.
Not based on rarity.
It's not always based upon rarity. In fact, I would say, by and large, it was a combination of rarity and demand which forges the price. So that sounded absolutely fantastic. It's a shame it can't be revived. You could revive that, Kev, I'm sure, at the Blackpool Tower, and probably used to play it back at the time. 1974.
I did used to play it. Didn't get a great response, but it had a few weeks in the box.
Well, Jeanette proves every dog can have its day, so you never know.
Certainly can. Let's go right back to your humble beginnings, Tim. You've amassed this wealth of knowledge. You're thoroughly interested and you've collected it. You're from a small town called Todmorden in West Yorkshire. Most people in most towns that latch onto Northern Soul know 100, 200, 300 singles. You know 300,000. What has fueled all this for you?
I think whatever I'm interested in, I tend to really go into the subject matter. Some people would say I take it to excess. So I grew up in Todmorden, where Northern Soul was the place to be and the place to be seen. The only disco in town played Northern Soul. From when I was 13 or 14 in the early 70s, you didn't bother with chart music or anything like that. So slowly, bit by bit, I gradually fell in love with the music and started collecting the records. And when I compare myself with my contemporaries of the time, I was the one that took it much further.
What were you buying, though, initially? What were the songs that you heard that made you go out, start buying, building a collection? Clearly, you weren't hearing, I would think, the rarest records on the planet in a small town. So what were you listening to?
At the very beginning, you don't really know the difference. You just want to own the tunes, and you're not particularly bothered about what label they're on. Not really.
No.
So probably the first record I ever owned was on that shockingly dramatic, plain, white, Out of the Past label, and it was probably Bill Black's Combo and Little Queenie, an instrumental of the Chuck Berry hit.
Because you'd heard it at the local disco?
Because Ginger and Eddie, who were the big local DJs, played it at the Ukrainian club disco, yeah.
Okay.
And, I can remember the first original I ever had was the OJ's Deeper in Love with You, another record you never ever hear these days.
Fantastic.
That still ticks all the boxes for me these days. And gradually you build upon that. And I would also like to say, when I first started paying a little bit of money for records, £3 or £4, and £3 or £4 in 1975 was not the £3 or £4 it is now.
No, of course not.
In fact, I remember buying something for a fiver at Wigan, and my friend Adi saying, "You're crazy." £5 was thought as being that much money.
But people were paying those prices even with the twisted wheel, though.
Yeah.
For
But
certain
nonetheless,
titles.
it was still regarded
a lot of money,
as being something.
Yeah.
And a few years later, I paid £25 for something, and it nearly made it to the local paper. It was thought that astounding, crazy. And for me personally, the price and the fact that the records were rare and you couldn't actually just go and get them, they had to be fought over, they had to be acquired, they had to be searched out. The fact that the records were rare was all part of the mystique of staying up all night, wearing slightly different clothing, and being part of a lifestyle that had a lot of unusual aspects attached to it, and that ordinary people, for want of a better phrase, didn't really understand.
Yeah. How many records are in your collection?
I have about 30,000 records. Yeah.
Is that all?
Yeah. Yeah. Probably 10,000 I've never played all the way through. I know they are soul.
Have you got Frankie Valli? You ready now?
Yeah, I do have, yeah.
I'm glad to hear it.
Nothing wrong with it. Fantastic
Brilliant.
piece of Northern soul. Yeah.
Absolutely. Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. A fascinating person, certainly one of the experts on Northern soul, and probably every record's been through your hands, would you say?
There are some I've never seen. I'd like to think they had, but there are some
all
I've
the
never
records,
seen.
one of the top dealers in the world, records have come your way, and what haven't you seen yet? Just in case there's somebody out there that says, "I've got that and I'm willing to sell it to him."
Well, it's a subtlety. It's a variation on a normal theme. But the Gentleman 4 on Wand, only yesterday I would have said that never came out. It was only on a promo copy. And yesterday on Wand, I saw a stock issue with red writing yesterday. And that's having known about the record probably for at least 45 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're always being pleasantly surprised.
It's fantastic. There is no end to it. That's the thing. And that's good. You don't want the hobby to finish.
Yeah. Tim, great seeing you again, my friend. And Merry Christmas to you.
And a Happy New Year to you, Kev.
Cheers,
Here's
mate.
to 2025.
Hey, thanks for watching. See you next time for another episode of Northern Soul Time. To listen to some of the great music we've been talking about today, click the links below. If you want to buy great Northern Soul music, visit charlydirect.com. Hi, I'm Kev Roberts, the host of Northern Soul Time. With me is somebody I've known since he was about 12, I think. And he's got his own event that he's promoting. He's a veteran already. And boy, does he promote Northern Soul big time throughout the UK. Jordan Wilson is with us, and I'm glad to have you here as well, Jordan. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm honoured to be here today, actually.
Thank you very much for helping us. First of all, tell us how you got started.
I discovered the This England footage on YouTube, and I think for me, especially being a male, and somebody who was 13, 14 at that time, to see people expressing themselves and just being able to dance so freely like that, it really interested me. And then from there, I started just attending like the local soul nights, and then got an interest in records, which
which is fatal.
Oh yeah. I did get warned about that, you know, but chose not to listen and kind of got a bit obsessive with buying records. But I know it sounds like a bit of a cliche throwback story, this, but it is the truth. And so I'd get like £3 a day dinner money, and I used to save. I didn't eat. I would just save up these coins, and I used to have little money bags onto my bed to put this money in. Anyway, so when I started collecting original vinyl, and then suddenly you start realising these records are a lot more pricier than your British press, £10, £20, you know. Sweet Sweet Lovin', the platters on pie and stuff like that. And I heard this record on an old cassette tape, Mixcloud recording, something like that. And I found that Sean Chapman had one for sale on his website. So it was £150. And it took me a while, but I reserved it with Sean, saved up my dinner money. To me, this record it's Northern Soul to me. It's timeless, still fills a dance floor no matter where you play it. But it's dark, isn't it? It's a really, it's a dark record. And that is what I've always enjoyed about the scene. I've always enjoyed the dark corners of the dance floor.
The way he sings it was, you know, you see, I don't like to lose, and then in come the busy girls in the background. I don't like it, I don't like it.
I'll walk all over you, I'll do it
exactly.
today.